We're back with another episode of the VIA podcast dedicated to exploring the American West. I'm Michelle Donati.
And I'm Mitty Hicks.
We are approaching fall. What is your favorite thing about fall?
Where do I start? I mean, from pumpkin spice lattes, leaf peeping. Here in Ohio, that is what we look forward to. And yes, I'm a candy corn lover too.
I don't know anyone who likes candy corn, but you, Mitty. I'm just kidding.
I get that a lot. But I am not ashamed. Standing in my truth.
You know, I think when it comes to fall, and fall colors in particular, the Midwest and the East Coast gets all the love. But I'm here to tell you that the West has a fascinating fall color display, and our guest today is going to talk to us all about it.
Lauren Oakes is a conservation scientist and writer whose work focuses on forests, climate, and our complex relationships with nature.
She has held various positions at Stanford University, including researcher, lecturer, and adjunct assistant professor. Laura is also the author of the award-winning In Search of the Canary Tree, the story of a scientist, a cypress, and a changing world, and the upcoming book, Tree Keepers, The Race for a Forested Future. She lives in a little forested canyon just outside of Bozeman, Montana.
Lauren Oakes, welcome to the VIA podcast.
Thank you so much. It's a treat to join you all today.
So we have to ask you, Lauren, is Oakes your real last name? Please give us the background. What's the story?
Oakes is my last name, real last name. It's spelled with an E, so often that's overlooked. But it seemed like fate that I would end up then working on all the issues surrounding the future of our forests.
If I could have a tree last name, it would be Maple.
Maple.
Mitty Maple.
Mitty Maple.
Mitty Maple.
Oh, that's adorable.
That was the name that my son proposed for my daughter, but I thought having a daughter...
Maple Oakes.
Oakes is my name. It's not my husband's name, but still, I don't think an Oakes can breed a maple, scientifically speaking here.
Oh, I love that. Tree humor. Lauren, how did you first get into trees?
Oh boy. My father gave me my grandfather's old Retina camera when I was 11 or 12. It was like one of those old school cameras where you open the door and the lens folds out, which sounds so out there given the iPhone world today. But I loved taking pictures and looking back all the pictures that I took of trees in my backyard. And I think I had an early fascination and appreciation of trees. Like many of us do. I do think it's innate. I see it in my son now. And I kind of look back and think that was the early spark of my interest in working on forest issues and in conservation and thinking about how can we build more sustainable relationships with our land and forests into the future.
Your books aren't just about trees, but about how locals interact with forests. You've been all over the world, from Alaska to the Scottish Highlands and even the Panamanian jungle. So many places for your books, and you really uncover this deep connection that we have with trees and forests. What's that all about?
Today, we often refer to life and nature as natural resources. And a woman I interviewed for In Search of the Canary Tree years ago, and named Terry Ruffgar in Sitka, Alaska, told me, but what if we were to think about our relationship with trees instead of calling them natural resources? So just swap out natural resource for relationship. I think of my son as, I think of him as a defender of trees. Very early on, we had a Douglas fir in our yard that had a infestation and the trunk was wearing down. It was going to fall and we had to cut it down. And he was just bawling, 3-year-old, like, why do we have to cut this?
Oh, I see it with my kids too. Like if there is a playground at a park and there's a tree next to it, my boys are going to be on that tree before they're on the playground. Like there is something about it.
Yeah. But I also think of myself as a traveler who goes to places that are in need or experiencing some kind of dramatic environmental change. So today, the one that's caught the media and certainly sparked my interest in writing this new book, Tree Keepers, was the desire for more trees to suck carbon out of our atmosphere. But they also they provide the air we breathe. They help regulate climate and weather conditions in local regions. They protect watersheds. They provide shade. They have a cooling effect. Those are some aspects of the benefits that forests provide, but we're also starting to learn many ways they can affect our mental health and our ability to heal.
Oh, wow.
So there's lots of ways that I think trees benefit us that we're still just beginning to learn.
I know that for me, getting to see fall colors really brings me some joy. And I know you must have some stunning places to share in Montana.
Some of the places I'm going to talk about today are not just the brilliant yellows and oranges and purples, but forests that also have magnificent conifers or evergreens in them that provide another contrast. So I love that aspect of leaf peeping as well, as seeing some of these beautiful evergreens that sustain their color, and they're also sustaining that amidst this rainbow of change.
You wouldn't live there if it didn't have some of the best tree viewing, I'm sure, Lauren.
Well, right now I'm looking out the window at a lot of evergreens, but adjacent to that is this beautiful grove of aspen trees. September is my favorite time of year. I am very much drawn to the aspens and the cottonwoods here that just have this beautiful yellow glow. Here in Bozeman, I do have some favorite spots. There are a couple trails that I really enjoy. A canyon called Sipes Canyon, and another one, Middle Cottonwood Trail. And Bozeman sits in the middle of some magnificent mountain ranges if you haven't been out this way. There's the Bridger Range, the Gallatin National Forest, the Absarokas, and the Spanish Peaks. Each area is, slightly different, but they all have this really incredible mix of trees that create stunning colors that are offset by the greens of these conifers or evergreens that keep their color through the winter. I love to take my son, who is now almost 6, in a couple weeks.
Aw.
Yeah. I've been taking him to Middle Cottonwood Trail and Cottonwood Canyon pretty much every fall since he could walk. And I just have some great memories of him 3 years old wearing this green and black plaid shirt amidst these beautiful yellow golden colors.
Can you just talk to us a little bit more about why you do take him every year? What is it about the forest?
It feels like a special time of being fully present in some sense of shared awe. And to me, that is our green spaces and our, wild remote forests, whether you're talking about a green space in a park or a city, a remote destination. They slow us down and they bring people together.
I love Bozeman, by the way.
Oh my gosh, there are so many good trails to pick. They don't get a lot of traffic, which is nice. So you do kind of have this intimate experience with the trees. I like getting out alongside a creek on Middle Cottonwood Trail, and you get a little sound from the creek. Sipes Canyon Trail is a pretty steep climb and a nice local trail. And I love climbing up there and getting a whole view of the Gallatin Valley. Something about the view of a valley and the rainbow of colors that come with fall is pretty special.
It sounds like you are encouraging our listeners to get to know their neighborhood forests, which reminds me of our conversation with Allison Hermans of Wild Care, and she was inviting us to get to know our neighborhood wildlife. So I remember she said, get to know your neighborhood skunk, obviously safely. But I love that with nature, we often think these things are far out, far away, not within our immediate reach. But if we just take a minute to be present and to open our eyes, it's like, all of this exists right around us. We just have to be open and ready to receive it.
I think that's so right. And I think there's also a growing movement to increase our access to green spaces and to bring more trees and forests into people's lives.
I'm always so grateful to grow up here in Ohio because we have an abundance of trees, and people in the Midwest, they love to brag about their trees and their fall colors and things like that. But unfortunately, not everyone has aspen. So can you tell us about a great place to see these golden aspen leaves?
Yeah. Probably my most favorite is in Telluride, Colorado.
Ooh.
Which if you're talking about a destination, that is a destination because there's one road in and the same road comes out. So you're not just stopping in Telluride on your way to do something else. You've really got to make an effort to go there. And there's a gondola that connects what is the ski area in the wintertime, the mountain village, down to the town. And riding that gondola above a landscape of yellow and orange and aspens changing color is is incredible. It's an amazing experience.
I was not expecting for you to say Colorado. I will just be honest.
Yeah.
Mhm.
When I think aspen, I think Flagstaff, which is sort of in my backyard, right? Like we have great yellow aspen in Flagstaff, and Flagstaff has a leafometer. So it actually tells you when the leaves are changing.
So cool.
Does Telluride have anything like that?
I don't know about that. I need to look up whether Bozeman has one. That's very cool, though. And, given the seasons have changed a little bit and seasons are changing, it's probably useful to be able to look up and see when's prime time leaf viewing. Do we have a national leafometer? I don't know.
Sure. Oh, that would be.
Somebody's
maybe
gotta
that's your
make
next
that.
project.
Let's Google that right now.
You talked about taking the gondola, which really changes the view that you're going to get, right? Because you often think of being in a forest and looking up at trees. But when you're in a gondola, you are basically looking among the trees, right? Can you tell us about your experience with that? It sounds like it was really magical.
Well, what's interesting in my memory, because I also hiked that weekend that I was there, and I certainly had some lovely walks just on trails running outside of the town, Telluride. I think of the crunching sound beneath my feet, the cool air, the sound of the wind in the trees, and the glistening of light, the glowing effect you get when the little yellow leaves kind of twinkle and blow.
It's like, the little flutter, flickering.
Yeah, I don't know how you describe that.
An aspen will stop you in your tracks. You'll just stop and be like, what? Is this glitter? Like, what's happening right now?
So pretty. But my memories of a gondola was just hearing my breath while also floating over this forest. So in some ways, it's like putting in earplugs to only be present with, your breath and the color of these trees below you, which is a pretty unique experience.
It sounds like it. I think to Michelle's point, when I think about Colorado, especially Telluride, I think about skiing. I didn't even think about the leaves and the forest. So, you talked about the gondola and you talked about hiking and just hearing the crunching noise on the ground. So what are the best ways to really immerse yourself in the fall colors in Telluride?
Oh, I would just go with take a hike and ride the gondola and do them both, and I've never been there in the winter to ski. I went actually to speak at a festival called Original Thinkers, which brings together kind of thought leaders and writers and poets and creates this wonderful fall event around the time the leaves are changing color. But I think that Telluride puts on a number of events in the fall that attract people to see the colors. It's a great place to go to.
I know personally, I like to go see fall colors. I want to take my family pictures, my fall family photos, when the leaves are changing. But as a scientist, what makes aspen forests so interesting to you?
I mean, this gets pretty darn nerdy, but I would say that
Nerd us.
Let's go.
It's cool how they regenerate. These forests, aspen trees will send up these sucker sprouts that will create the next generation kind of out in this ring around them. So they're really good at keeping the next generation going. And so when I find myself in a aspen forest, I am looking at the bigger trees and also looking for their next generation, which is often right at their feet. It creates a different structure of the forest as well. But that was a pretty nerdy answer.
No, it's a great answer. I've never thought about it that way. But again, it's that shifting of perspective that we're not just looking at a tree, but we're looking at a tree that's also creating the next generation of trees. And that's really special.
I love that. I mean, the West is famous for trees like sequoias and redwoods. Those don't change colors at all, but I'm sure when you combine them with other fall colors, they must look amazing. Where are some good places to find this kind of scenery?
Yeah, I looked to Sequoia National Park, which is an amazing park. I had the opportunity to visit a few years ago. I was giving a talk in Three Rivers and inside the national park. It's always about forests and climate change. But I also thought it was a great opportunity to bring my son.
Yeah.
Back then, I think he was only like 18 months, maybe 20 months. So gosh, my memory of it, my mom came as well. And then we all went to this grove together where there's General Sherman. And if you don't know General Sherman is a 2,200-year-old sequoia that stands about 275 feet tall. And
oh, wow.
It's an enormous tree. that by volume, some people think is the largest in the world. Anyhow, I remember my tiny son with his unstable feet standing beneath it, looking up, and I literally thought he was going to topple over backwards. He was trying to crane his neck, and oh my gosh, I put my hands out like you're doing a trust fall or something. But it's a really special place to visit. You get the grandeur of the giant sequoias with a change of colors of other species in the forest. So those giant sequoias are interspersed with other kinds of trees in the landscape, and you get dogwoods that turn orange and crimson. There's, fallen fern fronds that turn the forest floor to this lemony yellow. There's a lot of other colors that come out in what most people perceive and what is predominantly a conifer or an evergreen forest.
What's so special about seeing fall colors in Sequoia National Park compared to some of the other places that we've talked about on this episode?
I mean, I think it's just a chance to see those amazing colors up against some of the largest trees on planet Earth.
To stand next to General Sherman.
Yeah. He's fenced off right now, but you can kind of get to his edge. And there's some pretty wild stories surrounding General Sherman and the fight to keep General Sherman standing. At one point, they wrapped the General Sherman in foil to protect it from fires down low, which is kind of wild.
Oh, wow.
He's still standing. Christy Brigham, the head of science in Sequoia and Kings National Park, one of the things she says is the giant sequoias are also the ambassadors. Like they're the ambassadors of all the other trees, They're in about, I think, 70 some groves scattered in California. I love thinking of them as the ambassador for the others.
I like that too.
It's great to get out somewhere to see the fall colors, but many times we overlook the trees in our own neighborhoods, whether at the local parks or walking down the street. So the fall colors are really everywhere, right?
Yes, everywhere. Well, not everywhere on the planet. Like if you're going to go to the equator is not a good place to look at changing fall colors. When I was researching this new book, Tree Keepers, thinking about urban forests was really eye-opening to me because, I'm an ecologist. I've worked in conservation for more than 2 decades at this point. I have been to a lot of remote intact forests, and I had the opportunity to travel to a conference in Seattle that was for urban foresters. So these were people working on increasing their tree cover in urban areas across the nation. And it just opened my eyes to seeing a city as a forest. There's an urban landscape, an urban forest where trees and buildings and our life coexist. If you just look at sheer numbers of visitation, if you will, to like a national park like Sequoia versus, the number of people living in and around trees in New York City or in Seattle.
Well, to your point, how do you know if you're stepping into an urban forest?
Some people I met would define the urban forest as that full landscape. So any urban setting with the trees in it. And that I was surprised by that because it doesn't say like you need 30% tree cover to be an urban forest or you need 20. It's not a cutoff like that. It was a way of thinking about our urban landscape, our man-made landscape and nature coexisting, which I just love that open definition because it means we're all in some kind of forest. And from my perspective, we can all be stewards of forests.
I visited Seattle for the first time earlier this year, and aside from coffee, the thing that caught my attention most were the trees and the fact that a short walk to get a cup of coffee or grab lunch, we passed so many amazing, beautiful trees that were full of squirrels. And like in Arizona, we don't have squirrels in the greater Phoenix area. We have them in Flagstaff. But like my kids it stopped us in our tracks to just see these
really
big squirrels running up and down the trees. And they're so entertaining. But I had never thought of Seattle as an urban forest. And then when you bring this up, I'm like, oh, that's exactly what I remember about it. But I wasn't thinking about it from that perspective at the time.
Seattle has something like 28% tree cover, which is actually quite a lot.
Wow.
And if you think of...
Is that a lot for a city?
Yeah, that's a lot for a city. There's some streets you look down and it's just beautiful canopies where it's like you feel like you're just driving through a forest because the canopy is extending over the road. And my memory, I love that you said the coffee because I also definitely enjoyed some good coffee while I was there. I was walking one day with my coffee in one hand and just had to stop and pick up these giant leaves and appreciate the Their color, yes, and also their size. So cool.
Is there anything else that makes Seattle's urban forest interesting besides the squirrels, in Michelle's defense?
It doesn't take much to interest me, Maddie. It doesn't take much.
Well, I think Discovery Park is a cool area to walk around that has some beautiful trees that change color in the fall as well. And the University of Washington campus is another great spot to look. They have a diversity of different kinds of species, some of which have been planted as if you were in a larger botanical garden. There are a lot of pockets of green throughout Seattle that are also pretty special to visit.
We've talked about forests in Montana. We've talked about Telluride and Sequoia National Park. And then we talked about Seattle. So what really is a forest? And as an expert and a scientist, how do you define it?
Oh my gosh. Okay, such a great question. All right, we're going to get nerdy again because there's about 800 definitions of forest in the academic literature, which is pretty crazy. I think that all of them, fail to capture what a forest can encompass. They're never really poetic or spiritual in nature. But there's all kind of definitions like a forest is one, I wrote some of them down here for today. A forest is one or more stands managed together under a single ownership of a single certificate. A forest is a biological community dominated by trees and other woody plants. I actually like that one because it doesn't have any kind of strange cutoff. Some definitions will say a forest is land spanning more than 0.5 hectares or with a tree cover of more than 10%.
Oh, wow.
It's kind of crazy.
I'm glad you're defining forests because a lot of people are talking about forest bathing. In our episode about foraging, our guest mentioned that insurance companies in Japan and Korea cover it. So can you tell us what exactly is forest bathing?
Yeah, it comes from a Japanese practice called Shinrin-yoku, which I'm not going to pretend to be an expert in by any means. But it is the simple and therapeutic act of spending time in a forest, something intentional. We're going to a tree, we're going to a forest, and we are going to spend time in it or with it to be present and to feel the benefits. When I was in Seattle, I spent time with a researcher named Greg Bratman, who I went to graduate school with. He leads a research group there that's really focused on understanding how nature affects our human well-being. And oh my gosh, he told me about this wild study they were doing where they were bringing people out to old growth forests. Some of you who have experienced a relatively intact forest may know there's a smell to it. There's a feeling. Those trees emit what are called terpenes. And there's some research and some hypotheses suggesting that those terpenes regulate our moods. They are what calm us down. I thought it was really neat because he's essentially trying to quantify what we get from forest bathing. Super cool.
That's so cool.
That is fascinating. And I may be overthinking this, which I tend to do. Does this mean that when you go for a hike in a forest, does that constitute forest bathing? Or is there like a larger practice? Do you need to like sit on a tree stump? And is there something else to it?
I know when he told me about this study, I was picturing all these people like kind of lazing on logs. I like to think of it as a more encompassing term, an intentional way of being in a forest. If I'm on a trail run and I'm just on a mission and I'm watching my watch every, 10 minutes to see if I'm keeping my 8-minute mile. I don't run an 8-minute mile these days, but that I'm not really being present. I'm not there with nature in the same way as I am intentionally walking through a forest and appreciating the species that are around me or sitting beneath one.
You've got to stop and enjoy the terpenes.
Totally. Soak them in.
I hope my doctor and the insurance company is listening to this because I really want them to, just put in a submit that, hey, I need to go to see the sequoias. You guys should pay for it.
Oh my gosh, I love this. This is actually a thing. They talk about this with kids and pediatricians are talking about this now. If you were to go to your well child visit, they're often checking in about all different kinds of things. What if we started asking, how much time is your kiddo spending in nature? Can I prescribe a forest walk to your kiddo who may be dealing with anxiety or problems of rumination, just obsessing over things that are happening at school? There is actually a movement among doctors to think about our nature contact that our kiddos are having. So amazing.
I love that.
Ugh.
If that's my ticket to get to see the sequoias and I can get a doctor to prescribe me that, sign me up.
You don't need any ticket, Mitty. Let's just go.
In this conversation with you both, one of the things that keeps echoing for me is that something as casual and sometimes seemingly superficial as leaf peeping is really this entry point into a deeper connection with forests and with nature. And it gives us the opportunity to soak in so many of those benefits. I have spent a lot of time thinking about how we are restoring forests in various places across the planet and how many people are getting involved in that movement. And while, yes, it is about restoration of our forests, it is also about restoration of ourselves. That work is the same. That work is really connected.
I am so fulfilled after talking to you, Lauren. Thank you so much for being on the VIA podcast.
You're welcome. I hope everyone will get out there and track down a tree or a forest and spend some time intentionally with it this fall as the colors change.
Michelle and I, our bags are packed. So maybe we'll see you out there.
See you at General Sherman.
Coming up on the VIA podcast, stories from AAA members. We'd like to take a moment to say thanks to all those AAA members and future members that are listening to the VIA podcast and have shared their travel stories. One story we've heard from members is how they've been able to use their AAA roadside benefits when traveling as the passenger in a friend's vehicle. That's right. AAA members can use their own AAA membership in someone else's car to receive roadside help. And that, right there, helps explain why AAA is America's membership. So, if you're not yet a member, simply visit AAA.com and check out the membership plans.
AAA members are big fans of fall colors in the West.
I can totally see that. I hope they have some good places to share.
AAA member Susan Jola from Arizona writes, wine country throughout Oregon and Washington is simply breathtaking in the fall, especially in Willamette Valley. Driving along the Columbia River Gorge on I-84 in Oregon and making a pit stop in Multnomah Falls is also a must-see bucket list item. Another favorite spot is in and around Grand Junction, Colorado in October. Driving through the Colorado Monument outside of town is amazing.
So I haven't been to Colorado during the fall, but Michelle, Oregon, I can talk about that all day long. Hearing this makes me think about my trip with my boyfriend last fall. It was just absolutely beautiful. It was gold. The air was crisp. It was a fun time to be there. Very beautiful.
We also heard from AAA member Manuela Vital from Arizona. Manuela writes, in Colorado, the road between Mancos and Durango offers a brilliant show of aspen trees turning fall colors, from purplish red to rust to pale yellow.
Okay, that is the third time I've heard Colorado?
Colorado has come up a lot this episode. I think we both need to put it on our list to check out for fall colors.
We have to.
Love your comments, questions, and especially your stories about travel in the West. Send us an email at viamail@viamagazine.com. Again, that email is viamail@viamagazine.com. The VIA podcast is hosted by Mitty Hicks and Michelle Donati. That's me.
Produced by Whitney Fanoof, editor-in-chief of VIA. Katie Henry, managing editor of VIA, and editorial consultant April Kilcrease, alongside Dave Beasing and Jason Jackson of Sound That Brands.
Thanks for listening. If you like what you heard, don't forget to follow and subscribe to the VIA podcast. That way, you'll never miss an episode. Discover more places to travel in the West at AAA.com/VIA. VIA Magazine is published by AAA Mountain West Group.
The views and opinions expressed by podcast speakers and guests are solely their own and do not reflect the opinions of AAA Mountain West Group or its personnel.